COVID has changed many things. In fact, some say it has merely accelerated the inevitable. And so many of us are quickly thrown into this new reality of remote work. And as companies become comfortable with remote work, the talent pool is no longer geographically restrained, which means they can hire from everywhere. So, how do we stand out from this global brain market to position ourselves well for the future where companies can hire from anywhere, you can work from anywhere, you can even sell your skills in packages to multiple employers rather than one? So, welcome home. Welcome to another Choose with TFC session. In this series, we hope to bring on interesting, relevant people to help us learn better from various perspectives. Life is not always about learning from people that you already agree with. Perspectives shape a rounder thinker. So in our pursuit of the life we love or managing our finances well, our guest for today is the founder of a leading platform for white-collar flexible work. They pride themselves for allowing companies to work with analysts and top researchers in 24 hours. Essentially, brains on demand. So let's welcome Ricky Willianto from the Ravenry. I'm personally very curious, like, how do you see the future of like white collar work then?
Yeah, I think white collar work is like that term white collar is quite a big umbrella, I would say. I think like when people hear white collar, they assume that these are, like high skilled workers, working in a nice office, wearing very nice suits, and therefore the white collar reference, right? But in reality, a lot of white collar workers are also low skilled workers. Right, a lot of people who work in larger organizations who are in very rote roles. So they go into work and they have very specific things they need to do, and it's very repetitive. I think a lot of people say that like huge transformation with a white collar worker, you can go remote. You can actually like they're gonna be the future of work, right? Like it's gonna be more and more white collar. But actually within that segment itself, those like lower skill workers are probably going to be at risk a lot, because that's the group of people that is most likely going to get automated away by technology, right?
Can you give me some examples?
Yeah, an example is like, I used to work with the bank in Singapore. I was a consultant, right? So one of the things we were doing for them is this like process transformation. As a user, as a bank customer, right? You have all these fancy apps, you have all this website, it looks really nice, right? You go in and like, oh, now I can apply for a credit card with a click of a button. How delightful, and like the bank puts a lot of effort in kind of like making sure that the experience is seamless for the customers on the front end. The reality is, on the back end, right, there's actually someone who is copy pasting the form and put it into another system, and then they'll print it out and they have to sign it and check it, before they will fax it again to another department who will put it into another system, right? And if you see like all these steps, right, it's not done by one person as well. So there's actually one person in step one, which is literally just to copy and paste. And then in step two, when they pass it to someone who is supposed to be doing the checking, it's another person who's an entire job description is just to make sure that the two forms are like there's no mistakes, right? They're identical, right? And then the person will fax it, right? So I think that's what I meant by the more low skilled white collar workers. Yes, you have fancy office, you have to wear a nice suit and go to work, but that is the kind of job that is going to be most at risk. So I think the transformation of workforce in the white collar space, I wouldn't say it's homogeneous, right? So there's a lot of different like nuances as well, depending on the kind of work or task that these people are doing.
Yes, I mean, the banks are so big that they have a middle office to match the front and the back office. So it's like
you have a middleman.
Yeah, like what's going on here? Right?
Yeah.
So I totally get that. A lot of UI on the front end, beautiful, but there's a lot of system back end patchwork that is like in tatters, right?
Yeah.
So that is the kind of people that are at risk, running
Yes.
very repetitive work. Is there an upside for everyone else that is like not so at risk, or maybe even opportunistic in this idea of like remote work where jobs come from everywhere?
Yeah. So maybe we can look at it from two perspectives, one from the employer, the other one from the employee. So I think for the employee as a white collar worker, I think oftentimes, most of the time now, a lot of the value you add can be delivered quite easily through digital means, right? So you don't really have to be in person anymore to sign things nowadays. You don't have to be in
My
person.
goodness,
to be
anybody
meeting
send me a
people.
physical form, I already want to like strangle
Exactly,
it these
exactly.
days.
I'm Indonesian, so I still have to deal with some of that with my banks in Indonesia. I have to be physically there to sign things,
Yeah,
right?
dude.
And like internally, that's how it works as well, right? Even within the organization itself, I think like a lot of people still need to do that. So I think as an employee, now that you have like all this technology that allows you to, have like virtual meetings, have a way to collaborate with your colleagues live on an app or a document easily. I think there's a lot of opportunity for them to actually basically kind of open up employment opportunities beyond just working with one person, right? So I think remote work definitely enables you to do that. The second thing, obviously, which is very obvious during COVID, is that there is no more office hours, right? Once you are not associating yourself in a specific place, with a specific group of people who work like clockwork, 9 to 5, then all of a sudden, like it is work is just part of your life, right?
Yeah,
So I think for white collar workers especially, I think because a big part of what they do is problem solving, is thinking, right? That doesn't stop. It's not like a tab where you can be like, okay, like I'm just gonna stop thinking about this problem altogether, right? So I think the implication for a lot of these white collar workers is that there's this like blurred like line. The line between work and life is getting more blurred, right?
Yeah.
And
It's actually very hard to manage this thing. Yes.
it's really hard, yeah. So yeah, sorry, I'm gonna go into like different areas, not just kind of like from a work perspective, but also from like how will that define life, right? For like white collar workers.
Definitely, because this is the future, right? Where your work and life, it's so intertwined
Yeah.
that you really gotta be more conscious about how to manage this thing.
Yeah,
Right. So it's
that's
all
right.
part of it. Yeah. Go
Yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
And I think the other element from the workers or the employee side is that I think as a white collar worker, oftentimes you're juggling a lot of things, right? So you are probably like an expert in like product management. Let's say and within product management, you're actually building risk product for a bank. I don't know why I keep using bank as an example, but
I mean, it's where you came from. So.
yeah, that's why I did come from that industry.
Yeah.
Work with a lot of people there. On top of those things, right, you're also doing a lot of administrative work. You're team managing. You're talking to stakeholders. You're working with external partners to get things done. You're working with your finance team to make sure that all these things like are being budgeted. So there's a lot of like other back end work as well that you do that is not necessarily something that you're truly passionate about as a white collar worker.
I'm
right?
definitely sure you're not passionate about it.
Yeah.
like I'm not passionate about those things.
There are bureaucrats who basically live for these processes. I can tell you that. In this, I think that's kind of like their moat to protect themselves.
That's their thing, right?
Exactly. The more process I build around me, the more untouchable I'll be in this organization. So
I actually know
there's
some of
definitely-
those people.
yeah, there's definitely people who's like that.
Yes,
But
yes.
I think what that means is there is again like that allocation of effort, time that is not optimal for the individual. So if you're really passionate about what you do, right? If you're really keen on building products, you probably want to spend more time doing that thing instead of the other things, right?
Yeah.
So I think the beauty of remote working is that you are actually able to just essentially sell that part of your capabilities to people. It's very well contained. It's like one thing, right? It's a very productized service that you offer, and you can suddenly work with so many different clients just on those things rather than worrying about like the finances, the administration, the team management. You suddenly don't have to worry about that because you're able to package just that one service and really leverage that skill of yours and make a living out of it, right? Rather than having to be like a typical full-time, worker
Yes.
who's doing a lot of those things. So I think that's definitely another dynamic that is going to be more apparent, right? Especially when competition in the market gets more intense with fellow workers and also amongst companies, right? Because let's start with the company, right? If the companies are getting more competitive with one another within the same industry, you want to hire the best talents who can do the best things, right?
For sure, yes.
So if you are, let's say you are, a food delivery app, right? It's likely that you want to hire someone, an engineer who's done a food delivery or something delivery related because the algorithm, like the UI, the kind of customer experience, like it's highly transferable, right? And you want to have the best person in that niche to be able to deliver the work that you need from them. And so I think the companies as well are going to be more demanding when it comes to looking for people like that, especially when there is no geographical boundaries anymore, right?
Yes.
I think on the talent side, the same thing, right? So let's say like I'm just a developer, right? It's gonna be harder and harder and harder for me to tell people that, oh yeah, I know like Ruby on Rails, I know Python. Like it's not gonna be enough anymore. It's about like what you've built, what you've done with those skills, right? That will truly differentiate yourself, right? And so with like a lot of this, people having kind of like the need or needing to kind of like specialize, I think like remote working will only intensify a lot of these things, right? Because then like you're competing not just with people in Singapore, you're competing with like Uber. If you're a Grab developer,
For
right?
sure, yes.
You're competing suddenly with like people from Uber and stuff like that, right? So yeah, all of a sudden like all this competition intensifies, and like white collar workers do need to find a niche for themselves, right? So that's kind of like on the employee side, right? I think on the employer side, it's like a slightly different, I guess, like dynamic, right? I think for employers, again, like back to the competition point, it's all about like having the best talents. The talent market is highly competitive in Singapore, and we know like that Singapore is a talent magnet, right? Like everyone wants to come here because all the HQs of the biggest companies.
Yes, all
in
the
Asia are
decision
here.
makers are here, so you get the best pay in this part of
Exactly,
town,
right?
right? Yeah.
And in the past, you do need to be in Singapore to do work for all these companies.
It's true, yes.
Whereas now, like, I think it's different, right? All of a sudden, the companies are able to kind of like tap into, again, because of digitalization, right? All of a sudden, you can just work with anyone from all around the world.
Yeah.
So I think from company perspective, I think there is a lot of benefit in being open towards the flexible model, because it allows you the flexibility of flexible work and flexibility. Yeah, it allows you the flexibility to kind of like work with bigger talent pools than ever before.
Yeah, for
right?
sure, for sure.
Yeah.
I have friends who like they got some of these jobs here, and then because of this whole lockdown period for a whole year, they have managed to kind of get their company to be comfortable with them, to know that they can do their thing, and then they pack their bags and now they're in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Right. So they're like hanging out in Vietnam but being paid like a Singaporean wage, and
Yeah.
they were originally from somewhere else.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like it's getting so dynamic, and that's the beauty of it. But that's also the scary part,
Yeah.
right? Because we are still kind of familiar, or maybe let's just put it out there that a lot of the guys that graduated before this time, they were still trained to get their resumes into the door, or like people that just have been employed for a few years. Like this is a big shift, for a lot of them, and they're not at the end period of their employment time. They're probably trying to go into their prime these days, right? So how then do they stand out in this new way of, competing for jobs online? Because you specifically said that, it's not enough to just know how to do Python. It's not just enough to know how to code. It's like now it's a lot about like, what have you done before? What is the application, right? And so I'm just kind of trying to envision this idea of like, I have some skill sets and I'm trying to get a job online these days, right? How do I go about, positioning myself?
Yeah. So again, like if we were to look at it from a supply and demand dynamic, I think from a demand dynamic, which is the employer, you always need execution, like people. So people who are going to execute on your ideas, on the plan, right? And I think I did mention, and I did talk a lot about like, you having to kind of like build a specific niche for yourself as a white collar worker. But I do think that probably is something that you will slowly build towards, right? And it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone, even like the fresh grad, have to have like, I have like a 20-year resume of being, like a developer, when you're only 20, right? So
that's the stupid part, right? Like some companies, they hire like new graduates, but then you must have 3 years experience. I was
Yes.
like, dude, what do you want?
Exactly, yeah. So I think on the demand side, there's always going to be demand for people at different capabilities level, right? So just now I was kind of like more talking about how it's just like overall, it's just obviously it's all going to get more competitive, right? But specifically like at the top, right? The ones who are really experienced. So I think on the demand side, there's definitely room for people to still, kind of like hire executors, right? So you don't really need to be overly specialized. You're just generalist. You have skills, right? And that's kind of like, what's needed. I think on the supply side, I always suggest people to think of themselves as a company. So you don't see yourself as an individual who just have like one thing to offer, right? You should think of yourself as like almost like a corporate entity with value to give, right? And I think the question is always like, how do you package it well then?
Yeah,
right?
for sure. That's a
Yeah.
big question mark, right?
Yeah. So I think for talents, I think they need to start thinking more around like it's not just about developing like those specific skills that differentiates you or almost defines you. I think a lot of people are very well defined or very comfortably defined by what they do, right? Like I'm a designer, I'm in finance, I'm an accountant. It's a very like nice pigeonhole to kind of like nestle yourself into. But now you have to start thinking about how you actually package that into like a valuable value add product that companies actually are interested in. So how do you sell yourself? How do you build a personal brand, right? How do you communicate like the value you can bring, right? So I think increasingly like talents need to be able to do that in a place where we can very easily be homogenized as human beings. It's very easy to kind of like just see us as like, oh yeah, it's just another designer from
Yeah,
like
you
another
get
university.
commoditized, right?
Exactly, right? So I think it's very important for talents to learn that the skills that they have is not going to be enough anymore, right? You cannot just rely on like your certificate, like your degree, your piece of paper that says that, oh, I've graduated from this university and have X skills, right? It has to be like you have to also think about how you actually market yourself and differentiate yourself. So yeah, and that's why I like the analogy of thinking yourself as a company, because as a company you need to think about like, okay, how do I like position my values? How do I kind of like communicate the product or services I can offer? How do I brand myself? How do I allocate my time into all these different areas so I can actually be more effective at selling my business, selling my company, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's a very important aspect of digitalization as well and the future of work.
Yeah, for sure. It's like higher competition. You got to brand yourself. You got to package yourself. But what are some like practical steps that people can do? Like after they listen to this, like what are some basic things that you think people are not doing enough because of your experience working with all these digital freelancers? People are not doing enough, and then we should do more, and so that our listeners get something out of this.
Yeah. That's a very tricky thing. I don't know if there is any specific things.
Yeah, just a few examples. I know it's not easy to like do this, do this, do this.
Yeah.
But yeah, what do you see some people that are doing in the market? And it's serving them very well.
Yeah, I think the best kind of talents out there are the ones who like practice their craft. Number one, I think it's not enough, as I mentioned, saying that you already have like acquired these skills, right? It's about, have you done anything with it? So if you're able to produce work and make it public, right? And if you're able to show that you've done like specific things that will help people understand like how good you are at what you do, I think that is very helpful, right? I think that's very important. I think second is, I think Asians are not very good at this, but Americans are really good at this. It's self-promotion. And
when you said that, I read in my head this word already came out.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, people in Asia don't sell themselves very well.
They don't sell themselves very well. So I talked a lot to like growth marketers on my podcast, right? And also founders. And I always ask them, who are some of your role models when it comes to company building or growth strategy, growth marketing in Asia? And they can't say like not even a single person. And I've spoken to like dozens of people, right, at this point, and like they get stumped by this question. And I think it goes back to the fact that we're just not very good at, well, specifically I feel like Asia, right? We're not very good at talking about what we've done, our achievements. And I think it's also very difficult for Asians to share their perspective, right? Like I feel like there's a bit of that herd mentality of like, okay, like what's everyone saying? Maybe I should just say the same thing, right? And I think that prevents you from being able to again stand out in the market and kind of like again like put yourself as an expert in something, right? So that's why I feel like there's not a lot of people who's doing that really well in Asia. And I think that's one of the skills that the new talents need to think about. Like, how do I brand myself better? How do I put myself out there? How do I have, I guess, the courage to also have a perspective, take a stand, and like tell it to more people about like what you believe in. Yeah, I think that's important.
Yeah. So do you think people should like write their own Medium blog, or like publish on LinkedIn, or run a podcast or something? It's like this is all part of selling yourself, right? If you decide that you are a company and you want to brand yourself and you want to position yourself, then you have to go on to outreach programs. You have to go on to guest other people's shows, or you got to be a little bit more active in this space, right? And do you think that is like a bare bones requirement to these days to if you want to get jobs online?
Yeah,
Because you must have digital footprint, right?
Yeah.
In that sense.
I don't know if it's bare bone requirement, but I would highly encourage people to do that because I think your resume is just not limited to a piece of paper anymore. You know, even like 10 years ago when you apply for a job, your employer will definitely look at your LinkedIn, right? And see like, oh, like where is he really from, like this university? Although LinkedIn has no way to verify, you can just say whatever, right? But people still look at that, right?
It's
That
true.
digital footprint, as you call it, and kind of like use that as a way to do due diligence on people. And I think if you're able to create your craft and put it out there, and maybe you're not a writer, but like just write about, you know, what you do, right? I think people appreciate that, you know, that little insight into your thought process and you as a person. I think definitely do that. You know, put your portfolio out there, write about what you think. You know, talk about it on a podcast or talk about it on Clubhouse nowadays. It's a
Clubhouse,
thing.
yes.
So yeah, there's definitely value, in my opinion, in generating like some, you know, I guess content online that helps you brand yourself better.
Okay, so that's important, right? But
Yeah.
then, in that way of looking at things, essentially you are only doing a component of marketing and branding yourself. But then, how does that translate into selling yourself then? You know, in this grand scheme of digital marketplace, all these different platforms that you can sell your skills, you know, how do you go about doing, you know, just kind of help us envision, you know, for the many people that have not sold their skills online,
Yeah.
you know, how is that like for many of them?
Yeah. So if you think about the freelancing world, right? Because I think that is kind of the extreme example of like you having to sell your craft, right? And you have to repeatedly do it, right? Not just to one employer, right? I think the way to do it definitely is to just produce the best work you can, right? And make it as you know, accessible as possible for people. Getting social proof for that. So again, like being part of a community and showing that, look, like I know what design is about, right? I know what, like, you know, furniture making is about, right? You know, nowadays there's all these niche communities.
Yeah, it's
And I
pretty
think,
cool. All the wood crafters and all those. I was
yeah,
like, wow, these are
the
popping
leather
out.
crafters and
Yes.
everything, yeah. So I think like being able to kind of like be a thought leader or just kind of like a prominent persona in that community, I think is helpful, right? I don't believe in hard selling because I think hard selling does imply that you are pushing specific service or product to anyone, right? So I do believe more in, you know, you showing what kind of value you can create and attracting the right people, you know, through those work that you've done, right? Not so much your promise, your word against, you know, like a set of requirements, right? It's more around having, you know, people understand like what you are able to do, showing people that you know your stuff, and using that as a way to attract like employers or, you know, people who want to work with you to work with you.
Yeah. So then on the topic of the right people,
Yeah.
right? You know, it's like it's very different now, right? You don't walk into an office, you don't go through like a few, you know, interviews, and you know that there's a whole process of experiencing, you know, your employer
Yeah.
and your colleagues and the environment, the space. But now, like you said, it's very blurred, right? Like
Yeah.
home, you can work from anywhere. So how do you then choose the right employer to work with?
Yeah. With the backdrop of COVID, I think a lot of things have definitely changed. Like I had like very different principles when I was I guess suggesting people, and also thinking about employment before
Definitely.
pre-COVID, right?
Yes.
So for me, like the biggest thing has always been find someone like a manager, that you're working with that really believes in you and you know can be your ally in your company.
Your champion, right?
Your
Essentially,
champion, yeah.
yes.
So I feel like that was always my number one rule. But I think now that look, there is this COVID thing and everyone is kind of like forced to work remotely, and you're not necessarily able to create a lot of that serendipitous, you know, opportunity to add value in a workplace environment. I think definitely like you want to work with a company that understands the need to change, you know, like, and the need to kind of like build different ways of working in this context, right, of remote, right? I think a lot of companies are still trying to figure out how to do that, right? So
Yeah, I think everyone is trying to figure out
Yeah.
how to do this.
no one is going to be 100% there,
Yeah.
right? But I think working with an employer that understands that, you know, it's not necessarily the most productive thing to get people to be online from 9 to 5, right? Like,
Wow.
trying to implement that kind of like rigidity into like,
I know they were trying to do
workplace.
some sort of like tracking software on the people, like, are you online? Are you doing your thing? I was
Yeah.
like, dude, that's crazy.
No, but that business is booming because of COVID, right? Like a lot of people are, I mean, like companies just do not know what to do. And to be honest with you, I can almost understand why they're doing that, because I think the people themselves are not trained to self-manage, right? And that kind of like goes back to what we were talking about earlier about like white collar workers. You have the low skill and you have the high skill, right? So in the past, it's always been like high output, like high output in the sense of like how many hours you put in and how many pieces of like form do you complete, right? It's not like necessarily the
Yes.
most valuable thing. If you're really smart, you probably like as an employee, you probably will automate that away
you can
somehow,
code something out, right?
Like with a macro or something. But I think a lot of companies and a lot of people still do not know how to navigate this. And I think the go-to solution has always been, okay, let's put as much structure as possible, right? So I think when you're looking at, I think nowadays when you look at an employer, it's probably important for you to consider like how are they transforming their business in light of these changes. I think I don't want to use this because I feel like it's a bit hard to tell what's working and not, but like culture is also like an important element, right? I think a company with like culture of like openness and transparency, I think will try to make it, make like information flow within the company work better, right? Work well in the context of COVID. I think companies that tend to be more hierarchical and like build that's able to build like positions of power by information asymmetry, which happens in a lot more traditional companies, will probably struggle more with remote working, because like what they're trying to do is they're trying to kind of like forcibly control and manage people remotely now, right? Which
Yes.
is, I think, like going to be very apparent if you're especially if you're kind of like working with a company like remotely. I feel like they're just going to go to the extreme of putting that command and control
Yeah.
culture
Yeah.
into the business itself. So I think that's also like culture and the leadership like at the top, which is where the culture comes from, is also another important element to look out for when you're looking at a new job, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Especially in the past where it's very high touch point, right? Daily, you can meet all these people. You have your managers, your colleagues. Every day you're connecting with all these guys, like physically in the same space, right?
Yeah.
But then now it's like, how do you do multi touch points a day? Like 30-minute Zoom call with everyone is going to kill the department manager.
Yeah.
just that alone, right? So that's going to change for sure. And like you rightfully point out, culture is a very big buzzword, and it's very hard to kind of determine culture.
Yeah.
All right. So how do we like, over the internet, online, how do we like kind of adjust expectations and filter, these kind of things? Do you have any like practical thoughts?
We're experimenting with a couple of things even within Ravenry now. I mean, like we always try to be as open and as flexible as a company even before COVID. But I think I do understand the nature of remote working that prevents you from having a lot of informal conversation and informal observation as well about what's going on in the company, right? So, for example, it's very difficult for my team to know, like for example, the development team to know what's going on the design side, what's going on the business side, right? So there's a lot of like things that suddenly become super opaque because you're not co-located.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas in the past, you can kind of like hear humdrums of like white noise background of your colleague doing work, right? Now,
Yeah, the other
there's no such
department
thing.
saying this.
Yeah.
I heard at the toilet this.
Yeah, but that I feel like that's what kind
Those
of
things
like,
are important.
those are important, right? That's
Yeah.
what actually makes culture, right? Because it's about like the minute interaction between people that forms like a bigger collective, I guess, organism that has specific DNA of behaving, right? So I think that's what culture is in an organization. But I think now that we're doing things remotely, a lot of that, I guess, more informal exchanges are gone, right? So a couple of things that we've done this quarter. One is we started to write more notes as a way to make sure that information is relayed clearly and also in a way that is highly democratized, right? So not only specific people get access to that information. We right now in a company, every single meeting that we have, we write notes about it and we publish it so that everyone in the company can read it. And that really helps getting people on this literally the same page, right? About what's going on, right? So that's kind of more on the formal side of things, trying to keep like the company direction aligned. On the more informal side, Actually, this wasn't initiated by me. It's actually initiated by one of my team members, Sanders, who started to kind of like create meeting rooms that is perpetual. So
So it's
that,
always there. It's in the background.
yeah,
If
so
you want to
he
work.
is always in that room. So he's a designer. Yeah,
Really?
he's always in that room and he's always live,
Dude,
right,
that's
online.
that's like community champion,
Yeah.
right?
And now it becomes a go-to place for people who just feels like they need a buddy to hang out with. And like he will attract like the developers to go into this room for some reason, right? He's a designer, but like the developers will be there and like, oh, like Sanders, what's up? You know? And like they will just talk about games, they'll talk about like, you know, me, they'll talk about like, you know, each other. And it becomes like a very like casual, I guess, hangout place for the team. And I think creating and making available this kind of spaces in an organization, whether it's on a team basis or it's just on an organization level, right? Like here's like the cafeteria where we have lunch together online, which I've done by the way, and I feel like it works quite well. It's just some small ways that I think as an employee can do without having to go through like all this bureaucracy of like, oh, like can we have like a meeting, like, you know, that is meeting room that's always open. You don't have to go through that, right? You just have to have a meeting room and people will just click on your link and join you, right? So like I think it's a very easy way for employees. It's accessible for them to even like implement it if that's what they need.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's very cute. Like just
Yeah.
kind of recreating that physical experience online, right? We do our best, right?
And there are actually companies who's kind of like building businesses around this, right?
Yes.
So I think there's this company called Tandem.chat who's basically building, you know, MIRC 32. Are you from that generation?
No, I know IRC.
But you know chat rooms, right?
I know
Those
chat rooms. I know
online chat rooms,
Oh
right?
wow, you're from that generation.
I was like, okay, I was like
Yeah.
6.
You're like the
but I
last.
remember.
You're like the last guys.
I call myself the elder millennial.
Yeah.
Like I was like just at the cusp of like, you know.
You just made it.
I just made it. I just made the cut, you know, into the cool group. Well, we're not gonna be cool for long. But yeah, I think a lot of companies are trying to build this like audio chat channels that is in a chat room style. Yeah, so you can go into different rooms and you're hanging out with different people and they're all working together, they're chatting, but it's perpetual. So if you kind of like, you know, you're running a company, all these rooms are available for you to kind of like go in and out, right? Just like a real office.
Yeah.
And you can listen to what's going on in that room. So I think that kind of technology, or like any company trying to replicate that kind of you know, environment, I think will be quite beneficial in helping you retain that culture.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay, yeah, we should check out the audio stuff. But yeah, so I think you've shared a lot of good stuff, right? But I want to kind of hear this last point about how companies are looking at their workforce, right? Because now it's even more different, right? In the past, it was like you have your core team, your management, and then you have all these full-timers, and then you have some part-timers that will rotate in. Generally, that's kind of like a structure for most companies, right? But these days, you have your core, your management, you know, and then your full-time, and then your like remote guys, and then, you know, your skills guys, you know. So how are companies kind of looking at this whole arrangement? You know, I thought it would be important for our guys to kind of get a better understanding so that, you know, they can maneuver this space.
I think there's quite a few things to consider when we look at how companies think about workforce. I think one is that like the siloed structure that is you know, the dominant structure now, where, you know, you have like specific functions running specific things that is completely cut off from other functions, right? So I think a lot of organizations are trying to change that because they're trying to promote innovation, they're trying to promote collaboration, and I think it's very much inspired by like the Spotify squad model, right? Where every single squad is able to move very, very quickly within a short period of time. And I think a lot of people are trying to replicate that. I wouldn't say that is a specific trend, but there's definitely that specific thinking that a lot of leaders are, you know, considering when they are trying to redefine or transform like the way their structure, the organization structure is, because you just need, in this day and age, you just need to have like the ability to tap into different capabilities, tap into different know-how, and find like new innovations, new ways of working, right? And I think a siloed structure oftentimes is, it doesn't allow you to basically kind of like tap into that creative side of an organism, right? An organization. So that's kind of like one way of thinking about it. I think from a talent availability standpoint, I think there is definitely like heated competition, right? between like larger companies for like very specific talents. So again, like let's use developers as an example, right? There's a short supply of them, and when companies like Grab versus Gojek, right, in the same industry, there is even more intense competition within that's a very already limited supply of talents,
Yes.
right? And they want like people who are very specific, in terms of capabilities and experience. And oftentimes the competitors have that, right? So I think, yeah, definitely companies are looking at,
Digging their competitors.
yeah, definitely.
It's always the case, right?
Yeah, like let's even not look at Gojek and Grab. Let's look at the advertising industry as an example, right? Like it is quite like a incestuous like industry in a sense because like you will just rotate around these companies as an employee, right? Like if you're an account
I don't know
manager for
how-
like
I don't know how they,
BBH, you're
I don't know how
probably
they're
like-
gonna feel about this. It's like incest, right? This bunch of guys. But I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm saying, right? Like, I mean, like, let's just put it out there. It's the fact because like it's a relatively small industry. It's very relationship based, right? The same clients will also rotate around these companies, right?
Yes.
So you want to kind of like hire from your competitors, right? And that's just gonna get more intensified, right? If you already have like such limited pool of people, now you are just hiring from your competitors, because you want to win that account, right? So there's definitely that element, for organizations, which is a more difficult market to work with, right? And I think from a talent perspective, obviously the solution, well, not obviously, but one of the solutions is definitely to kind of look at different ways of working with them as an organization. And again, that has to go back to the structure. So if your structure doesn't allow you to have like flexible workers, on-demand workers, it's going to be very tough for your team to have to deal with like this random ad hoc person who just drops in for like an ad project.
There's
or,
no
like,
support system around this. Yes.
Exactly. And there's no like SOP, there's no like best practice internally that's been defined clearly as to like, okay, A, this is what you need to do. B, don't forget to sign this kind of paper. C, because now you're talking about like someone external, right, to your organization. Whereas in the past you can just pull like Jamie from design to come and help you. Now there's no more Jamie, right? Like this, like Xander, who is like, from this design, he runs his own design freelance business, right? So I think there's definitely that to consider, right? That competitiveness means that you need to find different ways of working with talents because talents feel like they're, the pop star of like, the industry. They're the expert now, right?
It's a whole new world. Yes.
Yeah, they have, I guess they have the power to kind of define who they want to work with as well. So I think there's also that element that I think companies are considering. And I think the other nuance of that is companies want to make themselves more attractive as an employer. So, I mean, like nowadays, there's like an entire department for like employee branding.
Yes,
right?
yes. There's a whole onboarding kit thing,
Yeah.
right? I have friends who do that. Like they give out onboarding kits because people are international, right? So then
Exactly.
they send you bottles, they send you socks, they send you all those kind of
Yeah.
things. I was like, oh, that's so cute.
It becomes like a differentiator.
Yes,
as an
yes, yes,
employer.
yes. Like, oh, yeah.
I'm not sure how like that specific like onboarding kit thing is gonna work out. I mean, like it's I think it's nice to feel
Yeah.
very welcome, but I feel like it's important for brand nowadays to like for companies to stand for very specific values, right? No one just wants to work for, especially the younger generation. They don't want to work just because like you are a big brand name anymore. They want to work because you are part of a bigger cause. You're trying to solve like a big problem, right? And I think a lot of people want to have that purpose in life. And that's probably something to do with like the Maslow hierarchy of like needs. With like the younger generations have like a lot of their very basic needs nicely fulfilled now, right? It's not like our parents or even our grandparents who have to kind of like, worry about food, right? Now they don't even have to worry about food. Now they can kind of like focus on like self-actualization, which means that companies need to kind of like have that, aspect of opportunity, like for people to actually self-actualize as an individual, right? Not just someone who is working for money anymore. So I think there's definitely that element of like branding and employee branding that is going to be very important for employers to consider. Yeah, and I think like the fact that now you are working digitally and remotely, you are not just limited to the people around you, right? So geography is not a boundary anymore. You can work with anyone, anywhere, right? So I think that's also another element that companies need to take into account.
Yeah, I think that a lot of good pointers. All in all, I think people need to recognize that yes, competition is crazy online, because everybody is online these days, but it is not just talents going through the competition. A lot of employers are also going through the competition. So there is a playing field here, right? It's not an end road. Yeah.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
for sure.
Yeah. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for sharing with us good stuff, and we'll see you around. Take
Thanks,
care.
Reggie.
Bye.
Hey, I hope you learned something useful today and truly appreciate that you took time off to better your life with the Financial Coconut. Knowledge is that much more powerful and interesting when shared, debated, and discussed. Join our community Telegram group, follow us on our socials, sign up for our weekly newsletter. Everything is in the description below. And if you love us, want to help us grow, definitely share the podcast with your friends and on your socials. Also, if you have some interesting thoughts to share or know someone that you want to hear more from, reach out to us through hello@thefinancialcoconut.com. With that, have a great day ahead. Stay tuned next week, and always remember, personal finance can be chill, clear, and sustainable for all.
I'm just gonna ask you some questions that we ask every single guest.
Oh man, I haven't thought about that.
It's okay. You're good.
Okay.
So the first one is, what is one of your core life principles that you hold closely to?
I mean, there's a few.
Just one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just need to pick one.
Yes.
I think like definitely always try to find ways to live up to your best potential, like self, and kind of like, always developing yourself, always learning, and maximize the value you can create to this world. And not just economic value, right? But like emotional value, cultural value, whatever you can create and bring good vibes to the world. I think you need to, as much as possible, work towards that.
Yes. Hashtag good vibes. Important.
Yes.
Okay. Second question. What is a personal finance advice that you feel needs to be propagated?
I think like people need to realize the power of compounding and time. I think that's one of the most powerful things that people can learn early on and take advantage of, right? And it's never too late, even though like I said, early on, but it's never too late to start.
Yeah, 10, 20 years compound is still very sexy, right?
It's very sexy.
Yes. Okay. Great. Point number 3 is, which part of your life are you giving additional focus on now?
I think like mental health is a very big one. I think COVID has only taught us that we're actually quite fragile. One little thing, which is like being cut off from like your 2 friends. I only have 2 friends. Yeah, 2 friends, right? Like can severely affect like your mental well-being, and that affects your physical well-being as well. So I think I've been spending a lot of time rethinking, what it means to be healthy, and what it means to kind of like be the best version of myself. And a lot of it has to start from knowing how to take care of yourself, like mentally. Yeah, so that's kind of like what I'm focusing a lot on now.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll see you at Bishan Park. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks.